What happened to Persia? Not the empire, not the culture, not the language or the poetry or the architecture or the philosophy. Those are very much alive. What happened to the name? One morning in 1935, the world woke up and the word Persia was no longer to be used in official correspondence. In its place, a new word, or rather a very old one, was to be recognized at last: Iran. But here is what most history books fail to tell you. Persia did not disappear. It was never conquered.
My noble
it was
subjects,
never
hear me!
erased.
Our
It
enemies
simply
gather at the gates.
reclaimed
We must stand
something that had
united
been
and strong!
taken from it centuries before, without any battle, without a single drop of blood. Something stolen not by armies, but by words. A name that had never truly belonged to the people who carried it. This is the story of one of history's most remarkable acts of cultural reclamation. A story that begins not in 1935, but thousands of years earlier in the mountains of ancient Greece, on the dusty roads of Anatolia, and on the windswept plateaus of a land
Behold,
its own
the
people
eternal
had
words of our
always
triumph.
called by a different
Let
name.
all
Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the Persian Empire at the height of its power. It is the 5th century before the Common Era. The sun rises over a civilization that stretches from the Nile Valley in the west to the Indus River in the east, from the icy peaks of the Caucasus in the north to the scorching deserts of Arabia in the south. It is the largest empire the world has ever known. In the royal city of Persepolis, columns of polished limestone rise 40 meters into the sky, their capitals carved in the form of bulls with the bodies of men. The air smells of cedar wood and incense. Caravans from a dozen nations pass through the city gates, Babylonians carrying embroidered cloth, Egyptians bearing gold and lapis lazuli, Lydians with silver coins, Scythians with bows and furs. At the center of it all sits the great king, the King of Kings, Darius I, ruler of a domain that contains nearly half the human population of the planet. And what do the people of this empire call their land? They call it Ariana. They call it Iran. The word is ancient, older than the empire itself, older than the dynasty of Cyrus the Great, older even than the earliest written inscriptions found in the rock faces of the Iranian plateau. It comes from the Avestan language, the sacred tongue of the Zoroastrian faith, the oldest prophetic religion in the world. In the Avesta, the holy scripture of Zoroaster, the land is called Ariana Veja, the homeland of the Aryans, the cradle of a people who had wandered there from the steppes of Central Asia more than 1,000 years before the first Persian king set foot on the throne. When Darius the Great carved his great inscription at the Rock of Behistun, a trilingual monument cut into a sheer cliff face 100 meters above the road, he did not call himself the ruler of Persia. He called himself Arya, an Iranian, a man of Aryan origin. His inscription reads, "I am Darius the Great King, King of Kings, a Persian, son of a Persian, an Aryan of Aryan stock." And yet the Greeks had a different story to tell. When the armies of Cyrus the Great first swept westward, the Greek world encountered a power unlike anything it had faced before. The Greeks called the newcomers Persai, Persians, taking the name from Parsa, a single province in the southwestern corner of the Iranian plateau. It was the homeland of the Achaemenid dynasty, the family of Cyrus himself, a region roughly the size of modern-day Portugal, a corner of a vast empire. Think of it this way. Imagine if a foreign civilization encountered the British Empire at its height and decided to call the entire empire Somersetshire, simply because that happened to be where the ruling family originated. Or imagine calling all of China Fujian province. The absurdity is obvious, and yet this is precisely what happened. The Greeks, and after them the Romans, and after the Romans the Europeans, took the name of a single province and applied it to an entire civilization, Persia, a word the Iranians themselves had never used to describe their country. For centuries, diplomats, historians, and travelers from the West arrived in this land and wrote home using that borrowed name: Persian wars, Persian gold, Persian carpets, Persian poetry, the Persian Empire. And all the while, the people living inside that empire, farming wheat on the central plateau, praying in their fire temples to Ahura Mazda, writing letters to their governors in the elegant script of Middle Persian, called their land, as they always had, Iran. Two names, one civilization, and a growing tension between what the world called this place and what the place called itself. It is a tension that would simmer for more than 2,000 years, and it would take one extraordinary man, a soldier's son, an orphan, a general, and eventually a king, to finally bring it to an end. By the early years of the 20th century, the land that the West called Persia was in a state of profound crisis. The Qajar dynasty, which had ruled Iran since the late 18th century, had presided over a century of humiliation. The country had lost vast territories to Russia in a series of catastrophic wars. British and Russian spheres of influence divided the nation like a body cut in two. British interests dominant in the oil-rich south, Russian power entrenched in the north. Foreign banks held the country's finances. Foreign companies extracted its resources. The last Qajar Shah, Ahmad Shah, was 21 years old, ineffectual, and widely regarded as more interested in his own comfort than in the fate of his country. The streets of Tehran in 1921 were a study in contradiction. The city of perhaps 200,000 people was a mix of ancient and modern. Camel caravans still moved through the bazaar alongside the occasional automobile. Mud brick walls surrounded neighborhoods where families had lived for generations. The smell of saffron and dried rosewater drifted from the spice markets. And yet, everywhere, there was the shadow of foreign power. British officials moved through the government ministries like men who owned the place, because in many ways, they did. Into this broken landscape rode a man on horseback, quite literally. His name was Reza Khan. He had been born in 1878 in a small village in the province of Mazandaran on the Caspian coast, a world of dense forests, rice paddies, and cold mountain air, utterly unlike the desert imagery that the West associated with Persia. His father, an army officer, died when Reza was still an infant. His mother, unable to raise him alone, eventually brought him to Tehran. He grew up poor, largely uneducated, speaking with the accent of the provinces. At the age of 14, he enlisted in the Persian Cossack Brigade, a military force trained and officered by Russians, which served as the most effective fighting unit in the country. He had no powerful family connections, no inheritance, no political patrons. What he had was something rarer, an almost supernatural force of will, a physical presence that commanded attention, and an intelligence that more than compensated for his lack of formal schooling. He rose through the ranks, year after year, campaign after campaign. When Russia's officer corps was swept away by the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, a vacuum appeared at the top of the Cossack Brigade. Reza Khan filled it. By 1921, he was the most powerful military commander in the country. On a cold February night in 1921, he marched on Tehran at the head of 1,200 soldiers. The coup was swift and almost bloodless. The government dissolved. A new prime minister was installed, a young journalist named Saeed Zia, while Reza Khan took the position that mattered most, commander of all military forces and minister of war. From that moment, his trajectory was unstoppable. Within 2 years, he had crushed regional rebellions that had paralyzed the country for decades. He reorganized the army, collected taxes with a firmness the country had not seen in generations, and built roads where there had been mud tracks. He had a vision of Iran that was as clear and hard as the man himself, a modern state, unified, sovereign, free from foreign domination. He had watched, with undisguised admiration, as Mustafa Kemal Ataturk transformed the ruins of the Ottoman Empire into the modern Turkish Republic. He wanted to do the same for Iran. Initially, he considered declaring a republic, as Ataturk had done. But Iran was not Turkey. The Shia clergy wielded enormous power, and they made clear that a republic was unacceptable. So Reza Khan took a different path. In October 1925, he pressured the Iranian parliament, the Majlis, to depose Ahmad Shah and send him into permanent exile in Europe. On the 12th of December 1925, the Majlis declared Reza Khan the new Shah of Iran. He chose a dynastic name that reached back to the oldest layers of Iranian civilization, Pahlavi, the name of the ancient Middle Persian language. He was now Reza Shah Pahlavi, the first ruler of a new dynasty. And he had work to do. The modernization program he launched was dizzying in its scope. A national railway, 1,200 miles of track, was built across some of the most rugged terrain on Earth. Secular courts replaced religious ones. The University of Tehran was founded. Women were unveiled by decree, their traditional chadors banned in public spaces. Western dress was made compulsory for men. The army was expanded and re-equipped. Foreign concessions were renegotiated, and some were canceled outright. But for Reza Shah, modernization was not merely about railways and universities. It was about identity. It was about the question of who Iran was and what the world called it. He had grown up in a country where even the name on the envelope of every diplomatic letter was wrong, where foreign governments, foreign newspapers, foreign history books referred to his homeland by the name of a single province given to them by people who had never set foot in the country. It was, to his mind, one more symptom of the colonial arrogance that had diminished Iran for generations. In the spring of 1935, during the Nowruz celebrations, the ancient Persian New Year, observed for more than 3,000 years, Reza Shah sent a circular to all foreign embassies and governments. The message was formal, brief, and unambiguous. From this point forward, the country was to be referred to in all official communications not as Persia, but as Iran, the name that the people had always used for themselves. It was not a renaming, it was a correction. Now here is the question that must linger in your mind as you reach this point in the story. If the name change was a simple restoration of historical truth, why did some of the most powerful governments on Earth resist it? Why did Winston Churchill himself, in the middle of a world war, insist on using the old name? And what price did Reza Shah ultimately pay for his act of national pride? The reaction to Reza Shah's 1935 circular was not what he might have hoped. Some governments adapted quickly, others were slower, and a few, including the British, were quietly resistant, for reasons that had less to do with geography and more to do with power. The British had a profound stake in keeping Iran legible to the framework they understood. The Anglo-Persian Oil Company, founded in 1908 after the discovery of vast petroleum deposits in the southwest of the country, was the most profitable British business operation in the world. Its very name carried the word Persia. In 1935, as Reza Shah's circular arrived in London, the British government quietly asked that the company's name be changed to reflect the new reality. It became the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. A small concession, but one that masked a much deeper resistance. The relationship between Britain and Reza Shah had always been complicated. The British had, in many ways, helped him rise to power. Their officers had supported the 1921 coup, and their diplomatic endorsement had smoothed his path to the throne. but they had never expected him to be quite so independent. The man they had helped install was proving to be a nationalist in the most serious sense of the word. He was closing foreign schools, expelling foreign advisors, renegotiating oil contracts, and now insisting that the world call his country by the name his people had always used. In the late 1930s, Reza Shah made a decision that would ultimately cost him everything. Alarmed by continued British and Soviet pressure on Iran, both powers maintained troops near its borders. He sought a counterweight. He found it in Germany. Trade with Nazi Germany expanded dramatically through the decade. German engineers, technicians, and advisors flooded into Iran. The Nazis, for their part, were delighted by the Aryan symbolism. The very etymology of the word Iran had become ideologically charged in the poisoned atmosphere of 1930s Europe. In Berlin, propagandists spoke eagerly of Iran as a fellow Aryan nation. It was an association that would prove fatal to Reza Shah's reign. When the Second World War broke out and Germany invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941, Iran's strategic value became incalculable. The Allied supply route to the Soviet Union, what Churchill called the Persian corridor, ran directly through Iranian territory. Hundreds of thousands of tons of war material needed to move from British ports across Iran and into the hands of Soviet forces fighting on the Eastern Front. Iran's neutrality was, from the Allied perspective, simply not acceptable. The British and Soviets demanded that Reza Shah expel all German nationals from Iran and allow Allied troops to transit the country. He refused, or rather, he hesitated. And in the brutal arithmetic of wartime, hesitation was the same as refusal.
In August 1941, British and Soviet forces invaded Iran from 3 directions simultaneously. Iranian resistance lasted 3 days. It was not a war so much as a demonstration of power, a message that however far Iran had come, however many miles of railway had been laid, and however many universities had been built, the old game of great powers was still being played, and smaller nations were still its pieces. Reza Shah abdicated on the 16th of September 1941. He was 53 years old. He had ruled for 16 years. He was put on a British ship, taken first to Mauritius, then to Johannesburg, South Africa. He died there in July 1944, in exile, in a city as far from the Caspian forests of his childhood as it is possible to imagine. His son, the 21-year-old Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi, ascended the throne in a country occupied by foreign armies, exactly the situation his father had spent his entire career trying to prevent. And in the strange way that history sometimes works, it was in the middle of this crisis that the old name re-emerged. Winston Churchill, in his correspondence during the war, repeatedly used Persia rather than Iran. He later explained that in the context of a conflict that also involved Iraq, the similarity of the 2 names, Iran and Iraq, was confusing in dispatches and operational communications. He formally asked the Iranian government to allow the continued use of Persia for wartime purposes. The Iranian government agreed. For a time, both names appeared side by side in official documents. But the moment the war ended, the drift back toward Iran resumed. In 1959, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi issued a clarification stating that both names were acceptable in international use. But the world had already been moving, slowly and steadily, in one direction. By the second half of the 20th century, Iran had prevailed, not through force, not through decree, but through the simple persistence of truth. And so we arrive at the end of this story, or rather, at a place where we can look back and understand what the story was really about. It was never about a name.
It was about the right of a people to define themselves, about the difference between how a civilization sees itself and how it is seen by others, about the slow, grinding work of reclaiming an identity that had been borrowed, misused, and returned in diminished form. Persia was always Iran. Iran was always Persia. The mountains and rivers did not change. The language did not change. The poetry of Hafez and Rumi did not change. The ancient fire temples, the ruined columns of Persepolis, the gardens and the roses and the carpets woven with the patience of centuries, none of it changed. Only the label on the envelope changed. And yet, even that small correction, that insistence that the world learn to say the right word, contained within it something enormous. It contained a declaration that this civilization, which had survived Alexander the Great, the Arab conquest, the Mongol invasions, and the colonial era, was not finished, was not diminished, was not willing to be called by a name given to it by people who had arrived 2,000 years ago and gotten one province confused for the whole country. Iran exists. It has always existed. The West simply took a little longer to learn its name. So let us leave you with a question to carry with you after you close this video, one without a simple answer, but one worth living with. How many other civilizations in history have been misnamed, misrepresented, misunderstood, and are still waiting for the rest of the world to catch up? Think about that. Leave your answer in the comments below. We read every single one of them, and the conversations that happen there are among the most remarkable things we have witnessed on this channel. If this documentary moved you, if it made you see something differently, please consider subscribing. Every new subscriber tells us that the long work of bringing these stories to light is worthwhile. And if you want to continue this journey through the ancient world, the next video is waiting for you. A story just as hidden, just as surprising, and just as important as the one you've just heard. Thank you, genuinely and completely, for your time, for your curiosity, and for staying until the very end. The fact that you are here, that you chose to spend this time in the company of history, says something remarkable about you. And the best, we promise, is still to come.